Welcome and thank you for joining Public Interface Approaches During an FAD Outbreak. Before we begin, please ensure you have opened the WebEx chat panel using the associated icon located at the bottom of your screen. Note that all audio connections are muted at this time. There will be Q&A today. To ask a question, select all panelists from the drop-down menu in the chat panel and enter your question in the message box provided. Alternatively, you may dial #2 on your telephone keypad to enter the verbal question queue. If you require technical assistance, please send a chat to the event producer. And with that, I'll turn the conference over to Liz Fernandez. Liz?
Good morning, everyone. I'm Liz Fernandez with the Professional Development Services Branch, and I'd also like to welcome you to today's webinar. So we have 3 speakers for today. Our first speaker is Mike Stepien. Mike has worked in public affairs at USDA for nearly 4 years. Prior to that, he spent 9 years working for DOD. He is an Army veterinarian and graduate of the University of Louisville. Our second speaker is Dana Ladner. She's with the Kansas Department of Agriculture since October 2014. In her role as Compliance Education Coordinator, she assists the agency with education and outreach opportunities, internal and external to the agency. Having been involved with 5 fully functional state-level exercises and 2 tabletop exercises in Kansas, Dana serves as phone bank coordinator and is part of the Joint Information Center. KDA, in close consultation with their USDA APHIS, Veterinary Services, National Preparedness and Incident Coordinator, EMRS staff specialist, have worked closely over the years to develop a database system, meeting the needs of Kansas agriculture during an animal emergency, allowing phone bank members to secure much-needed information from the public. And our third speaker is Lisa Quiroz. Lisa manages the Animal Health Branch Emergency Preparedness and Response Section and has worked for the California Department of Food and Agriculture for over 20 years. Lisa has spent the majority of her career with the state in emergency preparedness and response. Over the last year and a half, she fulfilled many deployments to the California Newcastle Disease Incident Command Post, serving as Planning Section Chief and Industry Risk Assessment and Mitigation Section Chief, where she worked on response strategy and oversaw case managers working with non-infected impacted producers in Southern California. Lisa represents California on the USDA Veterinary Services National Training and Exercise Plan Work Group, where she works with colleagues around the nation to further animal health responders' preparedness. And with that, I'm going to turn the webinar over to Mike.
Hey, good morning, everyone. My name is Mike Stepien. I want to issue a quick clarification here. I'm an Army veteran, not an Army veterinarian, so just want to make sure everyone understands that. So I work in public affairs with USDA APHIS. I want to thank you all for taking the time to join us on the webinar today. And I've been asked to provide some general guidelines regarding public response in the event of a disease outbreak. So I will move on to the next slide, and we will get started. All right, let's go over these 9 different bullets here. Jump to the first one, limit the number of messages. People can only retain so much information, so there's no reason to go overboard. Think about the critical information your audience will need, create key messages, and support those messages with facts. If a foreign animal disease outbreak occurs, put together a team and identify your key messages and stick with them. Identify your messages based on the following questions. Who is your audience? Who are we speaking to? What do they need to know about the issue? What's really important to them? And what do we want them to know regardless of the questions that are going to be asked of us? Use your interaction with the media as an opportunity to get across your messages. Stick with the facts and answer questions, but push those key messages across. Ideally, put together 3 key messages with 3 supporting facts for each message. These should be simple enough for a sixth grader to understand, so no reason to get too scientific with these. The second bullet, be brief. Concise is the way to go. This is pretty easy for someone like me who's generally pretty quiet by nature, but it's difficult for people who are naturally talkative and really extroverted. There's no reason to give more information than the reporter needs to know. Just stay concise. If there's a moment of silence when interacting with a reporter, just stick with that moment of silence and let it play out. It may be uncomfortable. It's not really part of our regular human nature, but don't volunteer information during that moment of silence. Number 3, use appropriate visuals. A simple visual can help your audience better understand your message. Something like a graph that's easy to interpret. Example of that is you see Vice President Pence consistently displaying the slowest spread visual. The visual is simple, it's easy to follow, and he repeatedly displays it. You know, we all understand the message he's trying to convey there. Be conscious of your nonverbal gestures. Body language often overrides verbal communication. One thing I'd like to point out is kind of nodding your head up and down when someone's asking a question. We really want to avoid that. It's common, it's human nature. You're just acknowledging that someone is asking you something. But if they're asking a potentially damaging question, it's not a good visual to be nodding the head up and down. So just kind of keep your mind or be cognizant of that. Nonverbal gestures provide a decent amount of your message content. Nonverbal gestures are noticed intensely and easily negative interpreted. For example, you can usually tell if someone is really upset with you, by their body language before, they're going to tell you, I'm pretty upset with you. People with their arms crossed, facial expressions, frowning. So body language is very important. And be careful the kind of nonverbal signals you're giving. And it depends on the situation. So, for example, smiling. In a high-stress situation, if you're smiling, you appear to be uncaring. In a low-stress situation, if you're smiling, you appear to be friendly. So a lot of it depends on the situation that you're in. Just a couple other things with your eyes. You want to maintain positive eye contact. You do not want to blink too much, turn your eyes up and down, shift from side to side. With your hands, some positive things to do is provide a full partial view of the open hand or palm. Use small gestures when talking. You don't want to wave your hands around too much or make distracting motions like playing with your coins in the pocket. Next bullet, gain your audience's trust. This is a big one. As a communicator, do not speculate about the future. Deal only with what you know. Do not lie. Make sure that the information that you're giving is accurate. In crisis situations, if the bearer of the bad news is a trusted source, there's a much more calming effect than if it's coming from an untrusted source. This is why your credibility is so important. You want people to trust you to reduce panic in crisis. Trust and credibility are difficult to obtain, and once they're lost, it's almost impossible to regain. So again, tell the truth and stick with facts. Next bullet is convince your audience that you care. Genuine empathy goes a long way. In stressful situations or crises, whether or not your audience believes you to be caring or empathetic has a huge impact on whether they trust you. It's caring, empathy, openness, and honesty are the approaches needed for high-stress situations. You want to speak clearly and with compassion, acknowledge the tragedy and the illness, and just really express that empathy. Align yourself with credible sources. Your agency may be unknown to your audience, and you will have to build trust immediately. They will know your reputation, whether other credible sources back you up. Each crisis situation could influence the outcome of future crises, and examples of credible sources include respected local citizens, city or government officials, stakeholders who benefit from your work, and possibly other federal agencies. Avoid negative language. You don't want to use words such as no, nothing, not, never, none, can't. You want to phrase things positively. Instead of saying something like, we can't do that, you say something like, we're exploring other methods or ways for doing that. Prepare and plan. Most concerns in a crisis can be anticipated and prepared for in advance. That's where your key messages are going to come into play. If you have time, do some quick background research on the reporter who will be asking you questions, and practice what you're going to say. If you have time, record yourself and watch to see what you're doing right or wrong. It'll feel awkward, but it's a great way to be prepared. So that is pretty much all that I have. I hope this information has been helpful. Feel free to contact me if you need anything in the future, and I will turn it over to Dana.
Good morning. I'm Dana Ladner with the Kansas Department of Agriculture, and thank you to everybody that has logged in today. We appreciate it. I'm going to talk a little bit this morning about our emergency exercise phone bank. And to provide a little history on our phone bank, the Department of Agriculture has been researching and testing effective and efficient ways to manage our phone calls from the public during an actual event. And we have practiced this over the last 5 years in the state of Kansas, and there have been many changes, from starting out with this is not going to work, we're going to shut it down after the first day, to, okay, we've got things under control, now what can we do to really find the most robust opportunity to secure information from callers from the state of Kansas. For our 2019 event, we had 18 Department of Ag staff members on the phone bank, and at that time we were split between two locations, our headquarters in Manhattan, and then off-site, either home-based folks were calling in or from our laboratory, which was in Topeka. And having the capability to utilize staff off-site really enables folks to join the phone bank from other program areas. The KDA phone bank consists of team members from all kinds of programs and divisions, and it may not seem right at first, but it really does help that phone bank members may not have an agriculture background. And this is really a positive. And this keeps the phone bank team members really sticking to the facts. They only disseminate factual information, and there's not a lot of opportunity to incorporate personal stories and experiences. We do have a KDA IT member dedicated to the JIC for technical assistance to the phone bank. And I would suggest anyone that's thinking about getting a phone bank set up and really testing it to make sure you have that IT support. We also have an SME from K-State Research and Extension on our phone bank to answer those technical questions, because so many of our animal agriculture experts are part of our IMT, and bringing somebody in from the outside that is able to answer those questions using our internal communication means it's really essential. That way it frees up our staff to do their job, but yet we have a great information person at our resource. One thing that is super important for internal, the phone bank coordinator, the JIC manager, and the PIO really have to have a great working relationship. They depend on each other, they look to each other, information is coming in from the phone bank, new FAQs are being determined and written as we see the need, and as Mike said a little bit earlier, FAQs need to be factual, succinct, and easy to comprehend, not only for phone bank members that are talking with the public, but for the public to understand the message that's going out. So it really, really is important on that factual, succinct, and easy to comprehend. Another thing that we have found out that our phone bank members will be taking information from the public, and it really is high priority for great information so we can assist other sections of the incident management team. Department of Ag has looked at a couple different ways to utilize our phone bank and software. With it, we utilize a KDA alert system for notification of our phone bank for activation. We utilize Ring Central for our incoming calls. We use Slack as internal communication because we're able to add people from the outside, whether it's from research and extension, maybe stakeholder groups that have an expert, et cetera. So Slack is our internal communication opportunity there, and we use emails. We'll talk about that just a little bit. And for our FAQs, we've used Google Docs and Microsoft OneDrive. And one thing I would suggest that any suggestions, any software your team is thinking about using, it has to be easy and allow for just-in-time training. For EMERS, we have been blessed that our USDA contact is working with our state because we really wanted to expand out on Kansas and what our phone bank could do. So they've made some tweaks that are Kansas specific to capture census information, animal health, date of the call. We map locations, and if it's not already self-populating, we utilize Bing maps for coordinates. We make sure this information is up to date and as accurate as possible so it can help in the case of control areas and other zones. And we have found out during our exercises that there's also other information where our callers deem important, and that may include wildlife, movement violations, etc. So we've expanded out the Kansas version specific to our needs. We have found that our phone bank really adds value to our exercise in being the front line. As I stated earlier, we reached out to the EMERS staff to be able to tweak that system to make our phone bank as valuable as possible to our state for an actual animal emergency. EMERS is the online application used for most animal emergency responses. It's web-based. Our users are authorized, so we make sure that our team goes into EMERS quarterly, so we keep our credentials up to date, because you never know when an actual emergency is going to happen, and we need to make sure that we can get on and get moving right away. And so as long as folks have internet access and a Microsoft platform, we'll be able to hit the ground running. In 2018 was the first year we tested the Kansas-specific EMERS information in our functional exercise. We made some tweaks, and we used it again in 2018 and took things to the next level for its capabilities. With the evolution of EMERS for our Kansas system, the initial contact record is really where we start. Working with the names, addresses, information on animals, etc. The software has been tweaked to have a sync wizard to walk our phone bank members through the system as easily as possible. The information is quick and easily captured by our staff, and the ICR is then immediately available to other MIT sections for action as necessary. From the very initial screen, once the phone bank team starts taking calls with information, if they state that their animals have clinical signs that are consistent with the disease, we'll click a yes box, and that information immediately goes to our operations center, and they have a person on their end that monitors that information consistently. The first time that we had this go in 2018, I was super nervous on how it was going to work, and my office is located on the first floor of our building, and operations was on the third floor of our building, so needless to say, I took 2 flights of stairs fairly quickly just to make sure it worked. And I got up there and was like, I'll bet you're trying to find if this works. And it did. So just knowing that first time that it worked like it was supposed to was really exciting for the coordinator and for the whole team, knowing that it worked the way it was. We also added additions for our permitting section. And if a caller comes in and they need to move animals or animal commodities, we're able to enter additional information into a permitting section that the wizard has led us to, and that again goes immediately to the permitting unit, and they're able to continue with their job. And there's also an other section, and that is monitored by the operations section for action as necessary. I want to kind of dive off in a direction right now, because with COVID-19, reality has hit Kansas. On April 1st, the Kansas State EOC called upon the KDA phone bank to assist the state of Kansas and the Department of Labor with their incoming calls. Reportedly, the Department of Labor for our state was receiving 50 to 100,000 calls a day. KDA was called upon by our governor and other the secretaries from the other agencies, because we had experience from our exercise to be able to come to the call of our state. At that time, our phone bank coordinator, who's myself, and the co-coordinator began discussions immediately on what the plan was going to be. Utilizing KDA Alert on April 1st, we sent a message to text alert to our team and asked them to begin looking for notices and log into their email for additional information. With discussions between the governor's office and cabinet secretaries, it became obvious that Department of Ag had something that our state could offer during the COVID-19 pandemic. Due to suspended operations, our governor actually closed down the state of Kansas, except for those essential personnel from March 23rd through April 3rd. We had KDA staff in regulatory positions that were going to be able to assist with the phone bank. Program and division managers were asked to review their staffing needs for the next 30 days. Our deputy secretary provided me as coordinator with those names. I was in constant contact with our IT staff, asking them their opinions on things, being able to get the right information to the phone bank coordinators, getting headsets to our folks with that. But we also had to realize that the Department of Labor was going to be taking the lead on the effort. So they have decided to use Amazon Connect for their phone bank, and our IT team communicates with their team on specifics, and they've decided to use Microsoft Teams for their internal communication. On April 2nd, we sent a second follow-up KDA alert, which notified our staff that we'd be back staffing on April 6th as best as we could, but that all KDA staff were to look for an email from me for possible phone bank activation. The KDA phone bank grew from 20 to 60 volunteers virtually overnight. All our volunteers from the agency are working from their homes. With the shutdown from the governor coming earlier, our teams had taken their computers home, so that was a great thing to already have in place. We utilized FormSite to gather information from our team members on days of the week and the times that they were available, and our co-coordinator began developing a staffing schedule. Our IT team ordered our headsets, and April 7th, the co-coordinator and I arranged for headset distribution at our headquarters in Manhattan and again in Topeka, where some of our staff reside. We basically had the headsets in the trunk of our cars, a name for folks that needed to pick them up. There we stood 6 feet from each other, they picked them up, and so it was kind of interesting. On distribution, we kept names of things, and then those that live in the state were able to mail those out. We've been in daily contact with the governor's office, who is assisting the Department of Labor, coordinating efforts for the phone bank. The co-coordinator and I communicate constantly on our needs, and prior to going live, we really spent a lot of time making sure our team had not only the tools that they had, but being able to let them know that we really believed in them and that they could help out with the Department of Labor. Even though they had not been original phone bank members, we believed in our staff and that we could step up to the plate. April 7th, Department of Labor provided our team with FAQs to read and to begin preparation, and on April 8th, there was a webinar by the Department of Labor on Amazon Connect, Microsoft Teams, and the unemployment benefits for Kansans. And then it got real last Thursday. 8 a.m., Department of Agriculture and the Department of Commerce became the front line for the phone bank for the Kansas Department of Labor. The Department of Agriculture committed 64 staff to the mission to assist, and the Department of Commerce assigned 10. And within the Department of Agriculture, we have 14 programs or divisions that are helping out on phone bank. First day, our team handled over 3,000 calls, and over 4,300 Kansans were served compared to 1,300 on that Monday. The Department of Labor are making technical improvements continuously just due to the call volume, and additional Department of Labor employees have been tasked with technical assistance and unemployment issues specific for the next week, which now it's this week, and things are definitely evolving and improving the best they can. Lessons learned. You really need to have a strong relationship between the phone bank coordinator and the co-coordinator, because one person cannot do it all. It's mentally and physically exhausting to have that many on your team that you're responsible for, and so having somebody you can depend on is essential. Expectations of the phone bank volunteers need to be made clear. We expected them to check their email hourly before we went live to make sure that there weren't any updates. We expected them to read the FAQs and be prepared for their first shift on it. We expected them to communicate within the team's internal communications. As stated earlier, succinct communications are preferred, going back and forth even with your internal team, bulleted items, highlighted on deadlines. During an actual event, no one has time to compose an email novel, nor does anyone want to read it. Anxiety levels are high. Department of Agriculture had new software, a new subject matter, and a lot of questions if we could do this, and I guarantee you we're doing it. Consistency of the coordinator is essential. Knowing that our team had somebody for the last 5 years that was able to work with the phone bank, those that were brand new had a confidence level and trust level that we could do that. We've been there, we had a plan, and we've executed the plan just as we have it prepared for our agency. Our KDA utilizes strengths training, and as coordinator, I'm the activator, maximizer, pretty much get things done. Let's go, let's get it done. The co-coordinator, she's got a lot of the opposite strengths that I do, and we complement each other perfectly. Couldn't ask for anything better from the team that we have and the co-coordinator that I have. So when you're thinking about activating a phone bank or really ramping one up, make sure that you've got your roles strategically assigned so people work really well together. We often talk about in Kansas and Department of Agriculture the KDA way. Well, this is a look at about half of the KDA phone bank team, and this is what we look like. There are a bunch of us on there working from home. We've got kids in the background, pets in the background, headsets, et cetera. So we're activating our team. We follow the plan. It's worked great. And for those that, well, none of us know anything about Kansas unemployment issues, and those that we do know are straight to the facts. And so it keeps us on task, doing what we're asked on behalf of the state of Kansas. I couldn't be more proud of our team. So to step up the way we have in the last couple of weeks, having the exercise to fall back on, this would have helped us along the way from our emergency management team. They've prepared us for what we need for an actual event. With that, Lisa, I'll let you take it over.
Thank you. It's Lisa from the Department of Food and Agriculture. I'm happy to be here today. I'm going to spend some time talking about how we interface with the public during FAD response. I'm going to go through many of the items that you see on the screen in a little bit more detail. One of the things that I wanted to touch on this slide is really about vendor interface. A lot of what I will share came out of our recent V&D response, but we've done many animal disease responses over the years in California, and so much of what I have to say is, valuable during, all of those other responses as well. One of the things about vendors that it's a lesson that comes up over and over again is when we hire outside contractors for their personnel help or even their equipment, us having clear direction for vendors is important. They are a member of the public. They do not understand animal disease outbreaks or response. They normally do not understand biosecurity. And so V&D was no different, especially when V&D was detected in commercial. We had vendors that were delivering, CO2 canisters, et cetera, and they had other businesses on their route, like hospitals and nursing care facilities and restaurants and other places that they were going after they visited our positive commercial premises. And so you can imagine the level of biosecurity that we needed to address with them in order to continue to maintain service with that vendor. In addition, we used outside contractors for cleaning and disinfection teams on those commercial premises, and we had to have, conversations about them not having birds at home and things like that. So I just wanted to take the time to just address vendors, because sometimes that can be an overlooked item. This is an example of an organizational chart that we've used. It's more about documenting the functions than it is the actual V&D organization chart. The V&D organizational chart was too large and would not fit on one page, and so I distilled it down to the essential functions. I'm sorry if you responded to V&D and your function isn't listed here. We believe all functions are valuable, but I just wanted it to fit on one page and just be a quick snapshot. There is no right or wrong way to organize. We try to have, form, follow, function, and make sure that we're organizing in a way that seems like we can reduce duplication of efforts, have adequate leadership and accountability during the response. And so one of the things I'm going to do during my talk today is I'll refer back to the organizational structure so that you can see an example of how we have organized in the past to address specific situations related to public inquiry or public interface. Two examples of, I guess, I'll call it a diversion from your traditional ICS training is, you'll see here we have an industry risk mitigation section. Early on during V&D, we wanted to make sure that we had dedicated personnel working with uninfected industry producers. And so that section was not located in the operations section where they were dealing mostly with backyard infected premises. We separated them out, the uninfected commercial producers, so that we could really focus that effort on risk mitigation and have very clean, biologically clean employees deal with our producers and not risk any contamination. This section was located at a different part of the building from the other operations section personnel, and I'd like to say that we tried our best to create, clean and dirty lines so that we were sending only clean personnel to those commercial premises. We also added an intelligence section, and that really had to do with enforcement, coordination with law enforcement, and really just an extra level when the public wasn't as cooperative in allowing us to get on and do our jobs. We needed to have, like, the next line supervisor come in and be a really good communicator and try to gain access that way. And the way that we did that were through special investigators. They have sort of almost law enforcement type backgrounds. They aren't law enforcement for us, but they are kind of that kind of mentality and that kind of person. Many of them are ex-law enforcement personnel, and they actually just took the time to talk and speak with the individuals, and, we're able, we gained some success that way. All right, so one of the biggest questions I always get is, how do we get all the work done? And one of the ways that we get all the work done is by hiring temporary staff. And one of the best things that we did, I think, was having the hiring, the job announcement, the candidate screening, the interviews, the hiring, all of that was done by personnel who were not assigned to the incident command post. That we did not have to take the attention away from our incident management team to go through and look for candidates and figure out who's the best candidate, et cetera. We ended up hiring, just CDFA hired over 100, I'd say 130, 150 personnel over the course of the V&D response, which almost 2 years. And we've actually identified some very, very good candidates. In fact, as a result of the ND response, when we have vacancies that are permanent positions with the state, we're often able to tap into those candidates who've worked so hard for us over the last 2 years and fill with those vacancies. So we actually did have a lot of success with hiring temporary staff. There's also challenges with hiring temporary staff. And, one of those is, temporary staff need accountability. They need to have a supervisor who is dedicated to. They need someone to track their time and their time off requests and when they become sick and all of that. So we actually hired a retired annuitant, which is, just a retired state employee who had been a manager before. And she actually came in and became dedicated supervisor over the temporary staff. The temporary staff were assigned throughout the incident command post, in their ICS sections, and they had a lead on their everyday workload in those sections. But they also had this dedicated supervisor for more of their HR and, performance appraisal and, accountability purposes. And so that was another kind of smart move that we made that really reduced the stress on all of the rotating personnel in and out of the incident, because, personnel do not get a consistent supervisor when you're rotating personnel in and out. And so having a dedicated supervisor, boots on the ground, was really helpful. Early on, we realized, especially with the duration of our event, going 2 years, people get sick, people need days off. So we needed a way to figure out how can somebody call out sick and let us know they're not going to be on their team that day, and, and allow us some time in the morning to rearrange the teams and send out, who we have on deck. So we ended up coming up with, almost like a hotline or a call line. It was just an answering machine where a temporary staff person could call in and leave a message saying, hey, I'm going to be out today. And then the dedicated supervisor can log in early in the morning, grab those messages, and then go to whatever section or team and explain to that team leader that their personnel was going to be out that day. So that's sort of how we handled all of the, the rotating staff typically do not get sick and take time off during their rotations because we're permanent staff and we're there for a temporary time. But the temporary staff who are hired locally are there the whole 2 years. They don't actually get time off. And so we did end up later on in the incident going from 7-day work weeks to 6-day work weeks for local staff, just to allow them to have a rotating day off throughout the week and not burn people out. One of the focuses that we had to do was on-the-job training. We had to have some way to orient and train personnel. We needed to teach public messaging skills to our field responders. We do train them that, on the back of their badges, when they check into the incident command post, everybody gets a badge. On the back of their badge is the public information officer telephone number, and they are directed not to talk to the public, but they also are a public interface entity. And when you're out in the field, you are going to interface with public, and we really needed to teach public messaging skills. A lot of times the conversations they're having with individuals are not, they're difficult conversations sometimes. And so we had some personnel from VS early on in the public information area who helped us create mock interviews and record those interviews, and we were able to use those video recordings of mock interviews to help teach those public messaging skills to our temporary staff, and that worked really well. So in case you're wondering, this is where we decided to organize our supervisor for the temporary hires. So in talking about public interfacing, the first thing that comes to mind for me is the public information officer, right? So the public information officer always works at the direction of the agency public affairs leadership. We heard from Michael earlier. He kind of shared the, the APHIS version of, the VS public affairs perspective. And the public information officer on the incident management team is basically working at the direction of the agency public affairs leadership, and they are communicating back and forth. There's two-way communication there all the time. The agency public affairs, together with the public information officer, are leading the public message and outreach strategy for the entire incident. They're also overseeing social media. One of the social media tactics that we used for public inquiries during V&D is, our social media manager on the ground is responding only to positive inquiries. As you might imagine, we have about, people have estimated 3 million residences within the quarantine area, California. That's a lot of residences who are pretty upset with us, and their inquiries on social media are not always positive. And so what our social media manager has decided to do, when someone makes a comment, you don't respond to every comment, but she does respond to positive inquiries, and that helps to train the public that if you really want information back from us, it needs to be a positive interaction. And I think that strategy has worked well. The other thing that has worked really well is they are using very short video clips to show best practices, especially biosecurity, practical things that people can do at their own home to help protect their animals from the disease. So socializing the area quarantine, this was a huge effort for us, especially initially. Initially, I would say the biggest public information strategy that we had just to get the word out and try to let the public know that there is a problem in Southern California and we're here to help, and we have this, we want you to report in if you're seeing clinical signs in your birds. And one of the biggest outreach strategies at the beginning was church and houses of worship. We had teams every weekend delivering presentations after church services in various languages, and that actually worked really well in Southern California. It did help us to connect with those people in the community who needed to have the information that there was a dangerous disease in their communities. And that really worked well. The other thing, these are some of the other strategies we use to socialize the quarantine. We put in a newspaper advertisement. I know that sounds sort of like a door, but it is part of our statute, and it is a requirement for us to advertise in the newspaper, so we did that. We worked really closely with the post office to ensure that they were not shipping, chicks and birds through the mail. And they actually have identified all of the zip codes that, they're currently out or ship in birds. And so the post office was one of the ways that we could get the word out about what the the quarantine area is. On our website at CDFA, we had heat maps that, were kind of on a timer, and they would populate the positives as, over a time period so that people could see where the hot spots are and were and see if they reside in an area that's, of high risk. We also published the quarantine area map, and, later on we got more sophisticated, and we put up a address lookup feature so that if you're unsure if you live in the quarantine area, type in your address and it would tell you, yes, you're in, or no, you're out of the quarantine area. We did lots of feed store outreach. We talked about social media, Facebook, Instagram, and then our state veterinarian has lately been posting weekly video updates on Instagram. And, those are really because, again, the duration of this incident, we really needed to ensure that the people of Southern California don't get lax and don't get complacent, that we're really still, working on getting after this disease, and it's still in their area, and we want them to remain vigilant. So again, this is where we locate our public information and website social media. These people are also critical in socializing the quarantine. You can see community education personnel and feed store inspection people. At some points during the incident, the community education piece was under our liaison officer. Again, like I said, there's no wrong way to organize. We try to let form follow function, and we move items around to make sure that they're getting proper attention. So we definitely moved functions around as that was needed during the response. The GIS specialists were critical in helping us draft the maps and they also help with other elements of technology like the address lookup. Okay, so what other public interface, do we do? A lot of public interface for us in California is collecting survey information, and we need that survey information for, driving the response. We need to understand where to draw those control area lines. We need to determine what our control and containment strategies are based on where the susceptible populations are. We use the population density for helping to understand how much diagnostic surveillance to do in certain areas. We capture everything in EMERS. Just like KDA, we are a very EMERS-heavy state. We do run all of our emergency foreign animal disease responses using EMERS, and we used it extensively for V&D. We also do what we call aerial surveillance, and, we spend some time using Google Maps trying to figure out if we can identify or spot areas of highest risk. Again, like I said, with 3 million residences in your quarantine area, and this being, mostly a backyard response, it became very important for us to understand, where the risk areas were, and so that was one of the ways that was used to identify that. And then there are also special circumstances, right? We had lots of flock plants. There's other, there's different species, zoos, things like that. So, so one of the first people that go out and get a public interface are our backyard disease surveillance personnel, and they usually have a standard set of questions, like a survey that they are filling out. Sometimes it's that ICR, the initial contact record that Dana mentioned, and, on those EMERS to go tablets, they can collect that initial information about every premises that we know about that has susceptible species. And that's usually done door to door, especially during a backyard outbreak. That was very necessary for us during this time. And so that's how we ended up doing it for V&D. Also, public interface while they're collecting diagnostic samples and then managing the sick call hotline. We did not use a phone bank during V&D, but we did use a phone bank during E&D back in 2002 and 2003. Our plant health division has a phone bank that they use primarily for their, plant pest and eradications. And we were able to tap into their phone bank system during that event. We actually used retired veterinarians who had worked for us before as our subject matter experts, and we had to provide the plant health personnel with like a subject directory and some FAQs so that they could answer the questions as they were coming in during E&D. During B&D, we didn't need to do that. Instead, what we did is we hired some temporary employees. We were able to hire actually really skilled personnel to handle that sick call line. We had some that were previously vet techs and had some agriculture background, and that really helped. We also had to hire personnel in, that were so we had bilingual personnel on that sick call hotline so that they could handle all calls from the public and document what was going on. And then some of the other functions under disease surveillance there, tactical epidemiology, just understanding what's going out in a specific region or area, and having somebody get their eyes on, their ears on, actually driving the streets and seeing what the risks are was helpful for us, and coordination with the laboratory always. So a little more about the sick call hotline. These are public calls from individual premises, mostly backyards. Sometimes we would get reports of random mortalities like, dead bird on the side of the road kind of things. Those are really difficult because even though you may believe that it's a good thing for us to test those birds, it's difficult for us to use that information. If you get a positive result when you test a random bird on the side of the road, where do what's the location of the infection? You don't know who owns that bird or where it has been, and so it makes it more difficult. So, us trying to figure out what to do with the public inquiries of random mortalities all over the place was something that we had to talk about and really understand the consequences of, okay, if we decide to pick these birds up and take them for necropsy or test them in some way, we needed to know what to do with those results. We also would receive calls in from animal shelters and rehabilitation centers, and in some cases, we needed to work with them to get, diagnostic surveillance from some of their birds and get them tested. I talked about we staffed this function with our temporary staff who were highly skilled. They did such a great job, and they are still doing that job today. And they did use a standardized form. Once they received an actual true sick call where people were reporting clinical signs in their birds, they actually filled out the form with all the information. The form was designed with the epidemiologist so they would capture the same information for every call. And then the staff from the sick call line would actually hand walk that form over to the epidemiologist where they would triage the calls and prioritize those for operations. This is sort of the way that we organize those functions that I just talked about. The industry coordination, you can see here we had lots of industry coordination. One of the things for public inquiry that was the best is we assigned case managers to even the uninfected premises for the commercial and larger non-commercial producers. We assigned them case managers. We also had a weekly call with industry that our state veterinarian led to help keep them informed of the movement and permitting guidelines, or encourage them for biosecurity and help them understand new requirements like biosecurity audits, for instance, on their premises. We did collect biosecurity information on all of the unaffected commercial premises to ensure that their biosecurity was up to standards, and we used that information to help inform movement permit decisions together with, we wanted to make sure that all of them had stood up their secure food supply plans and that they were protecting themselves from the disease. This is, again, this was a section, and this is how we organized that section. Backyard disease management. These guys actually do a lot of public interface. In particular, those appraisal and indemnity personnel. We mainly use the appraisal calculator, so the appraisal job wasn't as heavy, but the indemnity folks, these really needed to be the sharp communicators. These guys needed to have a lot of empathy for the public, and they really needed to understand crisis communications. And so we actually needed to hand select and hand pick personnel to be on the indemnity team. It wasn't a job for us to just send anyone over there. It needed someone who really could communicate. And, VS brought in a lot of indemnity personnel that were really good to help lead these teams. But we had some equally good temporary employees who came in and stepped up to the plate and really had very good communication skills. And then, those that are performing euthanasia and, we also, instead of C&D for every backyard, we did a fallow period for virus elimination. And so the fallow inspections were conducted, every 20 to 30 days throughout the 120-day fallow period. And so we did have personnel out in the field going out and conducting fallow inspections. And that was also another, public interface opportunity. This is how we organized those functions. So when a commercial premises became positive, we actually activated those commercial premises moved from the industry risk mitigation over to the operations section to manage. And so commercial disease management, we did assign case managers from the ops section to manage those sites. They had site managers. We did, mass depopulation and landfill disposal. And again, I am oversimplifying all of these just because we have limited time to talk about these items. All right, and then, so the last slide is, a lot of people ask me, do you need all that personnel over time? And the answer is no. During the course of the incident, this chart came directly out of EMERS. It's organized by personnel's depopulation dates. So this mainly captures the rotating personnel, not necessarily as many of the temporary staff are located here because they didn't have demobilization dates, as you might imagine. But the need for personnel ebbs and flows throughout the incident, and you can see as we move way over here into April how little personnel we have April of 2020 versus, you know, way back at the beginning of the incident when we were at our peak. And so the personnel needs do ebb and flow. We have over time needed to reduce our temporary staffing, and so we had to do that in a very organized, methodical manner. The incident management team really oversaw that contraction of personnel, and their input on who and when, you know, to actually pull that trigger that was necessary, you know, was considered before we ended up doing any contraction of personnel. And I guess the last message I'll leave here today is really the importance of a consistent and flexible overall response plan. For us, what we learned over the course of many disease outbreaks is that policy changes are probably the hardest on public interface. It's really difficult to explain the rationale behind policy changes in the middle of a response. So I would say that, you know, being flexible but also ensuring that we have some consistency is the best way to go. And with that, I think that's my last slide.
Thanks, Lisa and Dana and Mike. We will take questions through the chat or the verbal queue.
If you'd like to ask a question, please dial #2 on your telephone keypad. You'll hear a notification when your line is unmuted, and at that time state your name and question. Alternatively, you may select all panelists from the drop-down menu in the chat panel and enter your question in the message box provided.
We'll give people just a couple minutes to see if there's any questions. I think the information that was presented was great, very interesting. Okay, we still don't have any questions in the chat. Are there any verbal queue questions?
At this time, we have no questions in the verbal queue.
Okay. Well, on behalf of the National Training and Exercise Program, I'd like to thank all of our speakers today. We're getting a couple comments in here that says this was a great presentation, thanks to all. And also, I want to thank everybody for all that joined the webinar. And as a little plug for the National Training and Exercise Program, if you have any ideas for webinars that, you know, we can explore for our emergency preparedness community, please feel free to contact us. And we also, all of our TEP videos or webinars are hosted on the video gallery online, which is posted at APHIS USDA Animal Health Training and Development video gallery. So, and the link for the video gallery is listed on the webinar announcement. So we do have a couple questions that came through the chat. A couple people wanted to know if the PowerPoints were available to download. I don't know if the speakers are willing to share these PowerPoints.
I don't mind sharing mine.
Okay.
Yeah, mine's just a slide. I'm happy to.
Okay. So as long as people have signed on with their email address, I can send the presentation to all. There's a question for Lisa. With the recent COVID-19 events, how did that affect your interaction and communication with the public? Did you see any additional challenges as a result?
That's a great question. Yeah, we did. We have both internal challenges we have certain counties in Southern California who are interpreting the shelter-in-place order more strictly than others, and they, so we had to, obviously, I think like many others, provide our personnel a document that they could carry so that they, it could show law enforcement that their job is essential and they're allowed to be out and about doing their job. Second of all, some of those counties are requiring some sort of face covering, not necessarily N95 masks, but they want face covering while anyone is out at all. And so that was another big change, that we had to make sure that we're providing face coverings for all of our personnel. And then we also needed to be sympathetic to the public's concerns, right? We are experiencing public who have concerns about us coming to their premises or going in and testing their birds, et cetera. Mostly we're in backyards and thankfully not in homes, but still people are nervous about allowing personnel coming to interact. I think it helps that we understand biosecurity. Like, a lot of people don't understand biosecurity as much as veterinary services do. And so we are in a very unique place to be able to share a good understanding of disease control and mitigation and biosecurity. And so we do try to help the public understand that we're going to use very good biosecurity practices and we're going to carry out our job in the most effective way. And, we have had to overcome some challenges and concerns by public for sure.
Okay, so there's another question that came in that said, for Lisa, what would you change on your next response?
Oh my goodness, we don't have enough time. Yeah, so for sure we would change. I think the biggest thing is this large scale of a response for the long duration that it went. We probably needed to engage by social media a lot earlier in the response and had a lot bigger presence in general, just, with educating the public and messaging and things like that. I would say that one of the biggest take-homes would be, just helping the general public understand more about what we're trying to get done. And it's a challenge. When I say that, it is not meant to be derogatory to anybody who worked in the public information or public affairs sphere. It isn't. It was just a huge challenge for us. And I think we kind of came to the social media party a little bit late. And so I would definitely start by sharing those videos and best practices of biosecurity and start with lots of education to the community. I think that is one take-home message that we got loud and clear.
Hey, do we have any questions in the verbal queue?
No questions in the verbal queue at this time.
Okay, well, we're just past 5 minutes past our hour-long webinar. Again, I'd like to thank everybody who attended, and of course, thank you to all the speakers. It was very interesting. I just want to let you also know that on the 22nd, the NTEP will be presenting basic principles of composting and USDA APHIS protocols for in-house composting of turkeys during avian influenza outbreak will be presented. And with that, I will wish you all a great rest of your day.
That concludes our conference. Thank you for using Event Services. You may now disconnect.